This is Living Power with Dan Hurst.
That's what makes a good employee. What makes a good employer? If you're a boss or a manager, what makes a good employer? Well, going back over this passage, we see in verses 14 and 15 that a good employer knows his employees. He knows his employees. He knows their abilities, and he knows what he can trust them with. He knows his employees well enough to know what he can trust them with. It's interesting to note that from the very onset of this story, we know that that guy with the one talent that's given the one talent, we know he's going to mess up. We just know. Why do we know that? Because his boss doesn't trust him any more than to give him one talent. He gives the first one 5, he gives the next one 2, but he gives this guy 1. Why? Well, because of past experience probably. He knew that he couldn't trust this guy with more than 1, if that much. He gives him a chance, gives him an opportunity, but the guy even blows that. We knew the guy was going to from the very beginning, didn't we? A good employer knows his employees. Verse 19 says a good employer holds his employees accountable. He holds his employees accountable. Number 3, a good employer rewards good employees. Verses 20 through 23. It's important that good employees be rewarded. And God says that He will reward us. But bosses and managers need to reward their employees who do good work. Even if it's just a pat on the back. You know, have you ever worked someplace where nobody ever said, "Good job"? Some of you probably work someplace like that now. You know, so we're somebody, and by the way, I'm self-employed. I tell myself every day, "Man, you're good." I take this very seriously. It's important. It's important that a good employer rewards good employees. Give them promotions if they deserve it. And give them a pleasing work environment. That's really, really important. Number 4, a good employer makes his or her expectations very, very clear. This is what I expect of you. And if you do not abide by these expectations, then this is what you can expect. Expectations need to be very, very clear. When I was managing in radio, I would take my employees one by one, and I would meet with them every quarter. And we would go over the list of expectations. And we would just say, "These are the expectations. How have you fulfilled these expectations?" And I let them tell me. I didn't say, "This is how I think you fulfilled your expectations. This is what my expectations were. Tell me how you fulfilled these expectations." I did it for a number of reasons. One, because it helped me to understand what they considered their expectations to be. In other words, I learned how they interpreted what I was telling them about their expectations. And so it helped me to manage them better. But it was very clear what their expectations were. And along with that, if they didn't accomplish their expectations, they knew what the results would be. They knew. It was very clear from the very, very beginning. A good employer holds his employees accountable, and he rewards them, and he makes his expectations very clear. Then in verse 30, a good employer doesn't put up with bad employees. That's just the way it is. When an employee does not produce value for the company, it's time to get rid of them. That's just a biblical principle. When an employee doesn't live up to the expectations and doesn't do what's of value to the company, it's time to get rid of them. It's just that simple. It's the right thing to do for the company. It's also the right thing to do for that employee. Otherwise, they're a drain on the assets of the company for which the manager, the boss, has responsibility. And they're counterproductive to the success of the other employees. A bad employee is counterproductive to the success of the other employees. See, because the worthless employee produced no value, he in essence kept the other employees from producing greater value. Not only did he hold the company back, he held the other employees back. That wasn't fair to the company or to the other employees. But here's what some companies are doing. This is kind of the way we do business in America and other parts of the world now. Since company cash flow and profit margins are critical to company value, Some companies would keep the worthless employee because they don't have to pay him very much. And then they get rid of the first employee that produced so much. Why? Because they have to pay him more. And so if they can get rid of him and take that money back, then they get the second employee to pick up the productiveness level. They force the second employee, who was a good employee, but he only produced 2 talents, remember? But if they can get him to pick up the pace, then they'll have better cash flow and higher profit margins. The problem with that mentality is that while it looks good on paper and it may put a little bit more money in the owner's pocket, at least for a little while, it's a failure spiral that will eventually catch up to the company. And we've seen that over and over and over in the American economy. And of course, by then, upper management hopes that they'll be out of the picture and they won't have to worry about it, or the company will have been sold or whatever. And so they're just basically abusing the system, if you will. But the idea then becomes to let's just rape the company and get rid of the real producers and make the good producers work harder. That way we don't have to pay out as much money. So the high producer gets canned, the worthless employee stays, and the pressure is piled on the second employee to operate beyond his abilities. Remember, he's a 2-talent producer, and now they're expecting him to be a 7-talent producer. And that puts him under tremendous stress and makes his life miserable. It's not productive management. It runs completely counter to the biblical examples of good management. If you want to learn to be a great manager, a great employer, study the life of Moses and Nehemiah. Those were great managers. Discover how they handle people and how they handle conflict. Observe their great management decisions. You'll see some amazing, amazing decisions, the way they handle things. And you'll also notice that they always handled it under the direction of God. That's what makes a good manager. That's what makes a good employer. I had the privilege of leading some success strategy seminars in the Philippines several years ago. Actually went twice. And one of the basic principles that I taught in the seminar was that if companies will help their employees become more successful, then those employees will by default make the company successful. It just makes sense. In other words, if I use my company to make my employees successful, instead of using the employees to make me successful, if I use the company to make them successful, the process of making them successful makes my company successful. It's just a biblical principle. Luke 6:38 explains it this way: give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. It'll be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. The next year when I went back to the Philippines for another series of the seminars, I spoke to the combined Rotary clubs of Manila. And the president of the host club introduced me before I spoke. And this is, in essence, what he said. He said, my company wasn't doing so well, and so I decided that I would go to one of these seminars. And I figured I couldn't lose, or it wouldn't hurt. So he said, I went to the seminar and I heard this principle about making my employees successful. And he said, it just energized me. He said, I made a decision that day that I was going to completely change our company philosophy. Our company philosophy had been that the employees were there to make me rich. I decided it would become my job to make them successful. So he said, I went back to the company. The next week I gathered all the employees together and I explained to them that I wanted to change the whole philosophy of the company. I wanted them to use our company to make themselves successful. If they would work and build a company to be successful for them, the company itself would benefit. That's the way I believed. And so I asked them to come up with a strategy. And I formed the teams. The employees themselves became the teams to define and determine how they would develop the company and how the company would be structured and grow and develop. He said, last year, he said, my company increased productivity and profit by 20%. 20% in 1 year. Now, he said one of the things that has happened is that, he said, beyond just the fact that we became more productive, was that not one employee left the company. And he said, I have a stack of job applications of people who want to come to work for my company. This principle works. If the idea is to make others grow and beneficial, an employer who takes the attitude, I'm going to make my employees successful, begins to make a big difference, not only in the lives of the employees, but in the life of the company. Your job can be extraordinary when you fulfill God's plan for your work. When you do it the way God has designed you to do it, your job will become extraordinary. What is He up to in you and through you, where you work? What is God doing in and through you where you work today? What is He up to in your life? What does He want to accomplish through you to impact where you work? Whether you are an employer or whether you are an employee, whether you are in management or whether you are in labor, what does God want to accomplish in and through your life to impact where you work? What is God up to? Why did He put you in that place, in that position, in that job? One of the greatest lessons that I learned was that I never got a job myself. All of my jobs were things that God allowed me to have. And He wanted to use me in a particular role, at a particular point, at a particular time in history, in a particular company. I considered that to be part of my ministry, and it changed my life. Every day you have a job is an opportunity. Every day you have a job is an opportunity to glorify God. Every day you have a job is an opportunity to glorify God. Every day you have a job is an opportunity to fulfill His purpose and His plan through your life. Let's pray.